Hello, my name is Dusana Dorjee. I am an associate professor in psychology in education at the University of York. And today I will be speaking about my research in contemplative neuroscience of well-being, with particular focus on the effects of contemplative practices in education. So you may ask, why developmental cognitive neuroscience? Why should we investigate the effects of contemplative practices in education using neuroscience methods? So we can really examine how contemplative practice affects us, our minds, our brains, our relationships in many different ways. We can particularly use some methods that investigate the impact of contemplative practices in the social realm, on our relationships, on those around us. We can investigate how contemplative practices make us feel, or we can investigate how contemplative practices impact on our behavior. And these are the most common approaches to investigating the effects of contemplative practices. But we can also look at the processes in the mind and brain as such. So we can try to investigate how contemplative practices change our ability to pay attention, our ability to modulate, manage our emotions. We can look at the changes in the mind and brain that are associated with our ability to observe what is happening in our mind, which is essential for contemplative practice. And we can also look at the links between these changes and some changes in biological markers such as stress hormones. So my research particularly focuses on the changes in attention, emotion, in relation to changes in the brain, and sometimes we relate these changes also to biomarkers linked to the stress response. So research on contemplative practices in education using these methods is much less frequent, or there is much less research using these methods, and our understanding is still in its beginnings. But that makes the area of research even more exciting. So what methods do we use when we investigate the changes in the mind and brain resulting from contemplative practice? So in my lab, most often we use methods that measure the brain activity on the surface of the scalp. So here we can detect the cumulative neuronal firing of millions of neurons. And we can do this research even in schools. So in most of our studies, we actually took the lab to the students in schools and we measured their brain activity in experimental tasks right there in school environment. Another method that we can use to research the effects of contemplative practices on the brain is magnetic resonance imaging. So I'm sure you have seen images of the brain with the little colorful blobs. Those are the images that magnetic resonance imaging can produce when we detect some changes in brain structure or in brain function as a result of contemplative practice. This method is much less portable, it is more expensive, and it is less friendly to kind of research with children and adolescents. So in most of our studies, we have relied on the electrophysiology. Actually, here right there, you have a participant from one of our studies where we investigated changes in the brain resulting from mindfulness training. So how does contemplative practice in schools change the mind and brain? What particular mechanisms in the mind and brain are modified? So one of the key mechanisms is the self-regulatory capacity. So self-regulation is the process of managing our attention, managing our behavior, managing our emotions in an adaptive way, in a way that helps us and helps others, that helps us function in the world in an effective way. Self-regulatory capacity can be thought of in many different ways, and there are many different theories of self-regulation. But in our research involving neuroscience, we particularly focus on self-regulation in terms of metacognition as the ability to observe what is happening in our mind, to observe our thoughts, emotions, our behavior, how we relate to others, how we communicate with others. And we relate this ability to observe with our ability to pay attention, to be able to control or manage our attention in a skillful way. This ability of metacognition and attention control is then closely linked to our ability to manage our emotions. So, for example, when we feel a bit frustrated, we often tend to apply some techniques. In the contemplative context, we can, for example, decide to shift our attention to our breath, or we may choose just to name what we are experiencing, frustration. And just by saying these words or by shifting our attention focus to our breath, we are actually modulating our attentions. And typically we are decreasing the strength of the emotion, and it makes us feel better. And this can be detected using the neuroscience methods, including those that measure the electrophysiological activity of the brain. And similarly, as part of emotion regulation, often our major task is actually to deal with repetitive thoughts, with our worries about the past, with our worries about the future. We often can get into a state where we engage automatically with a spiral of negative emotions without even noticing that, without the metacognitive awareness being strongly involved. And this is exactly what contemplative practices can help us with, because they help us notice sooner when we start to worry, when we start to engage in such negative ruminative thoughts. And they can help us shift our attention through the abilities of attention control. So in our studies, we have tried to assess changes in these mechanisms using electrophysiological methods primarily. And this all makes a lot of sense also with regards to the latest research on phenomena such as mind wandering. So this research has shown that nearly 30, 40, and sometimes even 50% of our waking hours is spent in mind wandering, in daydreaming, in engaging in random thinking that we may not be aware of. So the metacognitive awareness is not engaging strongly in telling us that we are mind wandering. And often we slip into ruminative thoughts, and sometimes it can be negative thinking as well, which again is not very good for our well-being. So contemplative practices can help us notice when we are mind wandering, and can help us notice what we mind wander about. And there is research showing that actually mind wandering about positive things, about positive experiences, imagining positive things, can actually help our well-being. And some contemplative practices use just that. So they teach us how to manage our attention, to control the content of our mind, to manage the mind wandering in a way that may help our well-being. And this is also what we have investigated in some of our studies. So when we are engaging these mechanisms of attention control, metacognition, emotion regulation, when it comes to the brain, when it comes down to the parts of the brain that are involved in these processes, we often would pinpoint in research the area of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. So this particular area of the brain help us shift attention when we want to. For example, in that case of rumination or frustration, when we are trying to shift our attention away from repetitive thoughts. And in this way, it can actually downregulate some parts of the brain that are involved in the stress response, that are involved when we worry, such as the amygdala. And the ACC, together with other parts of the brain, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, in this way can help us manage our attention and our emotions more skillfully. It is obviously in reality not that simple, so it never happens that only one part of the brain would be activated, even when we sleep, whatever we do. So it's always complex networks of the brain being activated and their activation being increased or decreased. But ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex, seems to be repeatedly a part of the brain that tends to be modified by contemplative practice and contributes to other brain activity in other parts of the brain. So the other essential mechanism that we study in my lab and that we think is essential to the changes that are induced by contemplative practice in our mind and brain and how it impacts on everything that we do is existential awareness. So existential awareness can be thought of as an overarching state, as the overarching sense of self and how we relate to the world, our perception of ourselves and the reality around us. And based on how we experience existential awareness, on some days or in some moments, we may feel very much focused on ourselves and not caring much about what is happening around us. And that often happens, for example, when we are stressed or when we are anxious. And other times when we feel more connected with others, when we feel more compassionate, when we feel more care about others and what is happening around us, about the world. In that case, we feel like our existential awareness has expanded. And this relates also how we manage our mind, to our metacognition, to our ability to observe what is happening in our mind. So often when our existential awareness is linked to states that are not so helpful to our well-being, we feel immersed in our thoughts. We kind of are in our own little world. Whereas when we, often through contemplative practice, expand the scope of who we are and our sense of connection with others, we may experience a state of existential awareness that is better for our well-being and can also be linked to a sense of distance from our thoughts and our feelings. This is a healthy sense of distance where we don't identify so closely with what is happening in our mind. And this in itself can help us manage our attention and emotions better. So there is research showing that this kind of more expansive sense of existential awareness can be linked to prosociality, the willingness to help others, greater sense of purpose in life beyond our own self-focus. It can be linked to greater empathy to others as well. And all these different qualities have been linked to better well-being. So when it comes to the activity in the brain that is linked to existential awareness, the truth is that we actually don't really know what particular areas of the brain or what constellations of activity in the brain across different areas are particularly sensitive to changes in existential awareness. This is because it's such a new concept, but we do have examples from some previous studies with adults that suggest that changes in existential awareness, for example, linked to the states of unconditional compassion towards others, are associated with marked changes in the brain that we can detect, for example, using electrophysiology as changes in the brain frequency. Or there are changes actually in the activity of the brain across brain areas, in so-called default mode of brain function, where we can see some shifts in advanced meditators in response to particular meditation practices. But coming back to contemplative practice in education. So to finish this presentation, I would like to give you some examples of studies from our lab where we particularly looked at changes in the self-regulatory capacity as a result of mindfulness training in the context of education. So in one of these studies, adolescents, 16 to 18-year-olds, were trained in mindfulness by their own school teachers, and we have measured the changes in their brains from before to after mindfulness training. And in this research, the students were shown different shapes on a computer screen. They were shown large diamonds, small diamonds, and some shapes that were meant to distract them. So they were shown on the screen only rarely, and they were in a way aiming to distract them, to throw off their attention. We were trying to assess how their brains react to these shapes, and particularly those that were rare and that were aimed to distract them. And we wanted to see whether we can detect the changes in their brain waves in response to these distracting stimuli, and how this would be modified by mindfulness training. And what we have found was that their brain response to these distractors has shifted. So what you can see in this picture are brain waves in response to the different shapes, and particularly to those that the adolescents were asked to ignore. So they were asked not to get distracted by these. So those were large diamonds and some colorful diamonds, and there were some star shapes as well. And what we have seen was that particularly after mindfulness training, this particular part of their brain waves in response to the stimuli, we call it the N200, showed a greater shift in voltage. So it showed a greater dip, which suggests that they were better able to ignore these relevant stimuli. And you can imagine that the ability to ignore distractors is really important, whether it comes to our kind of learning, whether it comes to performance on a test, or our ability to manage our emotions. So you can see it better in this graph, where after mindfulness training, those students who were trained in mindfulness show greater ability to inhibit, to let go of irrelevant stimuli in comparison to the control participants. And this was also associated with better metacognitive abilities, particularly less distraction by behavior or stimuli that could be dangerous, which is particularly relevant to adolescents, where risk-taking behavior can be a problem. It's also a healthy part of adolescence, but kind of risk-taking behavior that can be dangerous is obviously not conducive to well-being. Importantly, this shift in the brain waves is actually what is sensitive to changes in the anterior cingulate cortex. So it's the part of the brain that I have mentioned is essential to our ability to notice and manage our attention. And we have found something similar, albeit without the brain markers in this particular study, with primary school children. So here we have asked the school teachers to report on problems they can see in their pupils when it comes to metacognition. And after mindfulness training, and this was particularly at follow-up, 3 months after children finished their mindfulness training, the teachers reported less problems with metacognition in children and better ability that children showed in regulating their behavior. And in the same study, we have also found that children self-reported less negative affect. So they felt less negative emotions at follow-up as a result of mindfulness training. Interestingly, parents didn't report similar changes in metacognition in their children. So it's kind of something that we need to investigate in further studies. But these findings are good initial indicators of positive shifts in metacognition in primary school children as well. And finally, I would like to briefly mention a study that shows how we can measure changes in emotion processing resulting from mindfulness training. So in this particular study, we have again investigated changes in brain activity in adolescents, in 16, 17 to 18-year-olds. And we were particularly looking at brain markers that we know are sensitive to changes in depression. So we wanted to see whether these particular brain markers would be modulated just in regular context, in the school context, by mindfulness training, indicating a better well-being or protective effects of mindfulness, of well-being. So to do so, we have shown adolescents a stream of faces. Most of them were neutral, like these faces. And in the stream of these neutral faces, we have included some happy faces and some sad faces. And from research with patients who have depression, we know that the brain responses, particularly to happy and sad faces, tend to be diminished as a result of their condition. So we wanted to see whether we can detect possible protective effects of mindfulness on these brain markers. And in this particular study, we were looking at these peaks. Those are responsive to attention we pay to emotions, and they are called P3B. And this is what we have found. Here it is summarized in a more simple way. So we have found that the control participants who did not receive mindfulness showed diminished responses to emotional faces at the post-test, whereas the training group after mindfulness training did not show any shift. So we took this as indicating that mindfulness had protective effects on emotion regulation in those who practice mindfulness. And indeed, when we correlated the brain responses with a self-reported empathy in the students, we found that those who have shown decreases in these brain markers also shown decreases in empathy. And this is important because we know that in depression, we see both of these markers decreasing. So there is a decrease in empathy, and there is also a decrease in the P3B responses to emotional faces. So again, these findings just reinforce the conclusion that mindfulness could have had protective effects on the students' well-being and modify their ability to regulate their emotions. So what do all these findings show, and where we go next? So overall, I was trying to show you that actually neuroscience can be helpful in detecting changes in the brain resulting from our experience, resulting from contemplative practice, particularly in this case. And we call these changes in neuroplasticity. You might have heard of that term. So that shows that actually contemplative practice can change the brain, and it can change the brain even after 8 weeks of mindfulness training delivered as part of regular school curricula in education. Another observation from what I have just presented was that the contemplative neuroscience can provide us with more complete understanding of changes in the brain together with the self-reports. And it also points to the need to detect longer-term effects of contemplative training, to look beyond just completion of the mindfulness training and at follow-up. And finally, the brain changes that we detect as a result of investigating contemplative practice in education may tell us something more broadly about the brain processes that are linked to well-being. If you want to find out more, you can look at the 2 books that I would suggest for you to read to find out more about the brain changes resulting from contemplative practice. Thank you.